You look at the timing of all of this. He's got E. Jean Carroll trial coming. He's got this judgment coming before the end of the month. He's got New Hampshire on the 23rd. We don't know exactly how Iowa's going to go. That should go well for him. There's a new poll that shows Nikki Haley jumping over Ron DeSantis. And again, things strangely tighten up at the end as you go to. He could be facing, Sam, a pretty tough month post New Hampshire. If what a lot of New Hampshire experts, political experts, if they're right about what they think is going to happen on the ground, that Nikki Haley is going to continue her momentum, possibly beat Donald Trump. We've seen Donald Trump melt down after he lost to Ted Cruz, after he lost, of course, to Joe Biden. That's a month of melting down. You have a decision by this judge that could bankrupt him. We don't know how much money he has. That could put him out of business in New York. And you're going to have a month of spiraling before the South Carolina primary. I'm telling you, for people that say it's over, I understand. And but I think there's an outside shot. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15%, that things continue breaking against Donald Trump because March doesn't get any easier for him with Judge Chutkan.
Right.
It's a very good chance of him being convicted by, the end of the month. A lot coming at him.
Right. I agree with you that people tend to think this is a foregone conclusion, and that's not really the case. I will say, let's say calamity for him happens in New Hampshire, right? Nikki Haley does consolidate everything, somehow ekes out a win. Trump now is looking at, all these civil trials and then also an uncertain political future. The benefit that he has politically, I can't speak legal stuff, but the benefit he has politically is this. Unlike in the past cycles, he actually has a semi-sophisticated campaign operation this go around. They've been working delegates, they've been working state parties. South Carolina, Nikki Haley has some roots there, but he still is pretty well positioned in the state. Nevada, he's going to just romp. I mean, that state party is controlled by him at this juncture, and she's not even on the ballot there. Right. Which isn't to say that things aren't going to get weird and tight and tricky for him, because I think the combination of the legal stuff, the political stuff, the piercing of this idea that he's just this behemoth, which could potentially happen in Iowa and certainly could happen in New Hampshire, those are tricky things to navigate. I do think that he, this stuff where he's going to these trials, he's showing up there because it obviously works for him in the course of a primary campaign. We're talking about him. He gets to go in front of microphones. But that's not going to be the same as we start moving away from these primary elections. When he has to start speaking to a different audience, again, it gets trickier, and you're underscoring that here.
And he's, he's avoided all of his debates so far.
Completely.
He goes and he gives speeches, says really crazy, nutty things. He still thinks he's running against Barack Obama. He's still worried about the onset of World War II. Says bizarre things time and time again.
About negotiating the Civil War.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have negotiated an end to the war.
Yeah.
Does he have to?
He said he could have beat Lincoln by 30%.
Yeah. Or we might not have heard of Lincoln if there had been negotiations about the Civil War. If it's a true two-person race between him and Nikki Haley, does he have to debate, or can he continue to just?
I don't think he has to debate, but if it's one-on-one, it gets so much harder. And I think at some point, some Republicans are going to, if Nikki Haley can make the argument, this guy wants to go and lose another election for us Republicans. He won't even debate. He's getting old. He's saying really strange things when he's in front of audiences.
That's a little more direct than she's been, though. Criticism,
but also,
of him.
Do you really want a candidate who's been convicted of a?
Right.
Yeah, and the polls keep showing that if he is convicted, that he will lose. That Biden will win. Now, I keep saying that if he's convicted by a D.C. jury, he's going to say it was a fake jury. It was a Democratic jury, but it's consistently they're showing that. And there was a focus group we had, the Times Opinion Page had recently, where, half of the Republicans who were talking said that, look, a conviction is what changes things for me. We don't want a criminal in the Oval Office. But we shall see. Just half. Well, I know. Well, that's
well, and he keeps saying things that work to his detriment. I mean, the Biden campaign, it sort of smirks at the Democrats that are whining. They really know, and I think they're right, that yes, they have to talk about what Joe Biden's done for America. But also, they have to run Donald Trump's clips.
Yeah.
That's what they have to do. Donald Trump saying, I'm the one who terminated Roe v. Wade. The other night, in just a powder puff debate, interview on Fox News, even there, he blew it. And he once again said, nobody could terminate Roe v. Wade. They tried for 50 years. I was the one who terminated Roe v. Wade. The Biden campaign immediately was like, cut, paste, boop. It's up online, and it's gonna hurt him, and that is going to be running with everything else that runs between now and November, and it's going to have an impact. And then even here, Donald Trump asked yesterday about the immunity argument made by his attorneys earlier in the week in the federal court regarding the January 6th election interference case, about how Donald Trump could order SEAL Team 6 to execute a political rival like Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. This is what he said.
Do you agree with your lawyers what they said on Tuesday, that you should not be prosecuted or could not be prosecuted if you ordered SEAL Team 6 to kill a political opponent?
If a president of the United States does not have immunity, he'll be totally ineffective because he won't be able to do anything, because it will mean he'll be prosecuted, strongly prosecuted perhaps, as soon as he leaves office by the opposing party. So a president of the United States, I'm not talking just me, I'm talking any president, has to have immunity.
So David Ignatius, he's not saying that only Donald Trump should be able to use SEAL Team 6 to order the execution of Nikki Haley. He's saying that every president should have the power to use SEAL Team 6 to order the execution of their political opponent and have immunity from it. Again, think about it's easy for us to sort of smirk at this, but again, this is a guy in the past week who's made that argument, who's argued that Lincoln should have negotiated with the South to keep slavery, and just 10 other just completely.
That's why
also made the argument that the economy, he was hoping the economy would crash. He was hoping that senior citizens would lose their 401ks. He was hoping that joblessness would skyrocket, and that we'd be in a Great Depression again, because it would help him get elected president of the United States. That was all said this past week.
So he's a man for whom the world really is a prop. It all is about him, and he can't resist these moments in which he gets himself into trouble. I mean, that's why I think heading forward in the campaign through the spring and summer, he is so accident-prone. Every week there'll be a confrontation. He's going to be in litigation pretty much constantly now through the progress of the campaign. And we've seen he can't resist saying things that make his problems deeper for independent voters. I'll just say that. Democrats already get in him, but there are a lot of people in this country who I think, as the more they watch, the more they just kind of scratch their heads and say, this guy should not be our president.
And that's why Team Biden is not. So they're just not as concerned as everybody on the outside.
They have a phrase for how Trump views the world. When he sees a problem, he makes it bigger.
Yeah. But he makes it bigger in ways that have not rebounded against him, mostly in his role to the Republican nomination, which I still think is mostly likely. But it complicates his life once that's over and he's in a general election. And that's what the Biden people are waiting for, because, as you say, Democrats are not going to vote for Trump. But there's a big swath of America in the middle that aren't that happy with Joe Biden, but haven't spent a lot of time looking at Donald Trump in recent years. And within this election, they will be.
He's been sort of off the airwaves for the most of the last year. I mean, now he's coming back and people are remembering what it was like. I mean, I think there was a lot of people forgot, those 4 years, and here he is back in our faces again. I think that's a big factor.
Yeah, it may not matter to a lot of Republican primary voters in Iowa and some other states. It matters in the suburbs of Atlanta, suburbs of Charlotte, the suburbs of Philly, the suburbs of Detroit, the suburbs of Milwaukee, the suburbs of Maricopa County in Arizona, the very places where this election, Willie, are going to be decided.